everyone, it's Holmes from Homestorybooks, and I am here in the same hoodie that I always wear in these videos. Sorry if it gets really dark towards the end of the video. It is winter in Canada, so it gets really dark at about 4 p.m. Anyway, I am here to talk about reading and recovering from burnout. Burnout is rough. It can affect all areas of your life, but especially areas where you take enjoyment. It is a catch-22 because you need motivation to create things you love, but also the fact that you're not creating means that you have less motivation. What is burnout? It was first coined by German-American clinical psychologist Herbert Freudenberger, where he researched volunteer nurses at a free clinic for drug addicts. It is defined as fatigue, frustration, or apathy resulting from prolonged stress, overwork, or intense activity. One of its biggest symptoms is an overloaded nervous system, a feeling of overwork that can induce more than tiredness. It is a space between sleeping and wakefulness that leads to cynicism and bone-deep indifference. So now you know what it is. Maybe you've experienced it before. But how do you address bone-deep indifference on an overburdened nervous system? I'm not a medical professional, and if you're suffering from burnout, please seek help. But I have experienced it before, and there are lots of different ways to navigate it. My aim with this video is to provide you with some books and resources to help you through. Again, this is not a care plan, these are just tips, I'm just a millennial, you know. My first tip for overcoming or healing from burnout is to understand where your burnout is coming from. Is it academic-based burnout? Is it burnout from a very demanding job? Is it burnout from being a community organizer for a marginalized community? Is it the stress of being a caregiver in a very emotionally demanding context? Is it the pressure from multiple jobs and children? Figuring out where your burnout comes from will help you heal from it, help you give yourself space from it, and help you access resources to address it. My next tip is don't read. Don't even worry about it. Seriously, honestly, it's fine. I think, especially in the bookish YouTube community, we connect our identities so firmly with books that we feel like failures when we don't read, especially if we are content creators, but not reading for periods is totally fine. While studying my master's, I barely read at all, other than assigned reading, and even then it was often really a stretch. And looking at doing my master's of library and information studies again, I suspect the same thing will happen. It's fine that I don't read or that I won't read. I am more than my capacity to read. More than my capacity to love books. During my master's, I got really good at baking and cooking and a variety of other hobbies, which I was not so great at, but I attempted anyways. There are lots of great articles that talk about mental illness and reading. One of them is Sean Ferguson's Mental Illness Can Make It Hard to Read, Is Why and What You Can Do. They summarize that trauma can affect two really important aspects of reading. One, your ability to escape into another world, and two, your ability to relate and sympathize or empathize with characters. The article says, if someone develops PTSD, the fight or flight mechanism gets stuck. The body no longer believes you're safe, no matter how well you know that cognitively, Williamson, a psychotherapist, says. As a result, the brain acts as though the dangerous event is happening over and over again, creating flashbacks, a variety of physical symptoms, and shutting down the prefrontal cortex, where academics and reading can happen. It continues, reading is a higher function activity and one that requires us to allow ourselves to be absorbed in the mind of another in order to receive their communication, says Mark Varheimer, an integrative psychotherapist. So basically, you can read mechanically, but any enjoyment you would get from reading would be lost, which is super discouraging. There are lots of other mental illnesses or disorders or barriers that can affect your enjoyment of reading as well. But how can we combat all those barriers? This leads into my next tip, which is to seek community care. We always talk about self-care, like fancy bubble baths, sleep routines, treating yourself, and taking yourself to therapy. But what is community care and how do we access it? There's a great article in the 6th issue of Maree, which is a food-based LGBTQ magazine like Hello, It Is My Brand If I Had a Brand, which is called Wounded Healers, Queer Anger Envisions Radical Wellness, a conversation with Lucas Volga. Queer Anger is a community collective that runs like yoga sessions, potlucks, community gatherings, and organizes like all the things. The article is really holistic in that it acknowledges things like minority stress, defined as chronically high levels of stress from people from marginalized groups, maintained by prejudice, ignorance, and hatred. The members of Queer Anger are very candid in how they discuss how difficult it is to run grassroots grassroots community-based services, and the fact that healing the healers is something their organization is still working towards. But I love that they use so many different techniques to prevent burnout and promote healing. In the article, one of the healers, Riddhi Sandil, says, "I think for me, yes, the term wellness has become corporatized. Perhaps I have always thought of the word wellness coming from the place of well-being. How can we foster a community connection with one's body, identity, relationship to food, and community? It's not so much the absence of illness, which is what I think of when I think of wellness, but more capacity to live with agency and to the most potential at the time." Riddhi goes on to say that as a brown, fat, queer person, wellness is not always a term that is assigned to her, and if it feels exclusionary to her, then it must be exclusionary to other people. But if we turn wellness into a concept that fosters connection, that fosters power, that fosters grounding, then the term wellness takes on a whole new meaning. That article left me feeling really warm and hopeful and fortified. The hard copy of the magazine might be hard to find, but you can download it easily from their website if you search Jarry. They have excellent recipes, articles, cocktail recipes, and queer histories. I highly recommend it. But find your community. This can be really tricky, especially if you identify along many intersections, but it's worth it. So many of us are on the bookish side of the internet, but how many of us go to a book club at our local indie bookstore or go to the bookshop on a book's release day? Actually, probably a lot of us. Potlucks, art markets, film screenings, art gallery showings, library workshops or classes, even dog parks can be great places to hang out and build relationships with people. Community care is about connection, but also about resource sourcing. If I need a doctor or a dentist that is LGBTQ positive, or a hairdresser or a cool art market to buy Christmas gifts at, my community will back me up. It also means that on a moment's notice, if I have nothing to do on Halloween, my burnt out self can message someone and go to an event really easily. When I am burnt out, scheduling is something I've really struggled with, so having a community means more options for events. And these communities can be online too, as we know from the bookish side of the internet and YouTube. Meme pages, Facebook groups, and Discord, all of these wonderful tools can help you vent to the universe. They can be especially helpful if they're closed or carefully selected. I am part of a queer or trans group that only allows queer or trans folks in. I follow a library meme page for work so we can all complain about full moons or difficult days. I have a group chat that I talk to my friends in, though I can only keep up with 1 or 2 group chats at a time, so it's all about variety and moderation for me. The one caveat I will say with online groups is that they are more difficult to monitor. The author M.K. Choi, who wrote Emergency Contact, was recently on the Call Your Girlfriend podcast. She very articulately said of social media, you're exposed to so much and it's so beautiful, but you're also exposed to so many things you're scrolling through, like very, very rich people's stuff, as well as your friends, as well as the memes. I think it gives this distortion field for how success and ambition is defined. In order to move forward and succeed, we have to make mistakes. The premium placed on success curbs the willingness to attempt something. This is not an entirely direct quotation, but I think it really captures the spirit of what I'm trying to say. Online groups are great, but usually when people post on social media, it's because they've been productive, which can be difficult when recovering from burnout. Comparing yourself to others is so easy to do. I love this article and comic, which I'll link below, from the lily that compares an artist's unproductive period to a fallow field, where nothing grows and the earth just has to return to its natural state before things can be planted again. My final tip before we talk about books and reading, which I've already mentioned, is to seek help. Go to therapy, talk to your doctor, although medical trauma is real, and look for professional help. It can also be difficult to access this help because of so many different barriers, like cost, childcare, transportation, but never stop looking or searching because you are worth it. And if you don't feel like you're getting the help that you need or your doctor doesn't believe you, seek a second opinion. This will be my shortest tip, but if you follow any tip, follow this one. So what do I read when I'm burnt out? Full disclosure, usually nothing. I find scheduling reading during burnout really unhelpful, so if I do read, I just tend to read in random snatches of time when the inspiration strikes, and if I have a book beside me. I love comics. I love web comics because they don't really feel like reading so much. I love cheap Archie comics. The bright colors just really help my brain a lot. I love picture books for the same reason. I love big coffee table books where like you can open any page and read that page and then flip back and go to the first part. Reading in non-chronological order really helps my brain during burnout. I also really love magazines like Jerry or Frankie for that reason. I love cookbooks. I love middle grade books because the chapters are short. I also really love erotica and romance books. I will unapologetically skip parts that I don't like, usually romance subplots, though not always. I don't enjoy the fact that there's this like obsession with finishing reading books or reading every single word. I think it can be really unfair, and I think that every enjoyment of a book is valid as long as you do enjoy it. There's a really interesting phenomenon called the misattribution of arousal, where if you start reading erotica or romance novels while anxious, your brain just decides you're horny and runs with it. There's this like flooding of positive hormones that occurs, and it overrides your original anxiety. This literary sleight of hand means that our brains rationalize all these flighty emotions, shortness of breath, and that allows you to relax and move away from anxiety. Okay, now you know what sorts of books I read, we have reached the actual point of the video. Here is a list of some of the books all about burnout for you to peruse. Let's start with non-fiction. The first book I thought of when thinking about books for burnout recovery was this very aptly named Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown. A Black feminist, Brown is a social justice organizer, doula, and healer living in Detroit. Her book comes from the traditions of Audre Lorde's Power of the Erotic and Octavia E. Butler's science fiction as a framework for her activism. The whole point of pleasure activism is this idea that if you carve out space for pleasure, it will minimize the repression and oppression you experience and encourage others to do the same. Love, food, sex, and community all remind us that joy can be a radical thing and can be transformative in the way we feel about ourselves. This next one kind of goes hand in hand with pleasure activism, and it is Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice by Leah, Lakshmi, Piepzna-Samarasinha. This book really celebrates the work that disabled, queer, and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are doing in order to sustain themselves in a world that does not make space for them. Both these books champion being both a warrior for marginalized communities and also being a hedonist, that art and activism are not separate from each other, but are also necessary for all of us. How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell is about how late-stage capitalism, the news cycle, and social media absorb our attention, our thoughts, and gradually degrade our relationships, our tangible hopes and dreams. It is a call to action and a toolkit on how to resist those narratives of productivity, technology, and by rebelling against these systems by bird watching, by doing nothing. The whole premise of this book reminds me of M.K. Choi's very thoughtful critique of social media, and oh my god, it's all coming together. Another great one is Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily Nagosaki and Amelia Nagosaki from Come As You Are fame. This discusses how cisgender women experience burnout differently from men. With a selection of scientific essays, these sisters break down the barriers between the patriarchy and late-stage capitalism. As an aside, late-stage capitalism really reminds me of like late-stage cancer, which is kind of fitting anyways. And it gives you helpful tools to manage burnout and also prevent it. This book has some pretty mixed reviews. A lot of people say it feels so relevant, so helpful, so eye-opening, and a lot of people say it's pop psychology and a lot like the contents of a woke feminist magazine without actually offering anything instructive. Some people said it basically gave them more reasons to be stressed and was not informative at all. Awards for Good Boys, Tales of Dating, Double Standards, and Doom by Shelby Lawman is all about how society holds up cisgender men and people to terrible standards of basic decency. It is based off the Instagram account of the same name, and reading the comment section of those posts is a wild ride. The book and the posts are therapeutic to read, wickedly funny, as comedic as they are critical, and super easy to read. Most of the chapters are short, sharp, to the point, and full of fun, full color illustrations. My favorite part of the book is where people look at her comics and are like, oh my god, like you're actually funny, as if it isn't Lawman's job to be a comedian. My other favorite part is when cisgender men come forward in the comments unsolicited, like, did you know I'm a feminist? As if men can't just be feminists, they have to announce it. It's cathartic cultural commentary in a digital age fraught with ghosting, memes, and single-panel comics. If you are burnt out, this would be a super easy read because the pages are filled with lots of color and movement and super simple truths. One I'd love to read about is Hikkikomori, Adolescence Without End by Tamaki Saito. Hikkikomori is the phenomenon where a young person becomes a hermit and lives in their parents' home or apartment for longer than 6 months. It is translated as acute social withdrawal, pulling inward, being confined, or shut in. It is estimated that 500,000 Japanese young people are Hikkikomori, as well as 500,000 middle-aged people. Perhaps the most compelling thing about Hikkikomori is apparently there is no underlying psychological cause. Saito's exploration of Hikkikomori is all about their condition and how it is brought on by a variety of sources, stresses, how Japan's unique social structures and family dynamics can both help and hinder Hikkikomori, and what a sufferer can do to help themselves and their families. I included this book because it was a uniquely specific type of burnout, and sometimes when we look at something from a different perspective, we can look at it in a totally new way. Saito's book is also really well known, and at the time of its publication in 1998, it sparked a discussion about Hikkikomori that continues to this day. It might be hard for you to source. It was published in 1998, like I said, by the University of Minnesota Press, so my library doesn't have it, and none of the libraries in my state have it, but the amazing collections and access librarians are looking for this across the country for me, so we'll see what comes up. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimura is a nonfiction book about our relationship to the world around us, to our environment, and how people can weave traditional ways of knowing with more modern scientific ways of knowing. It is gentle and is as comprehensive as it is compassionate. Kimura is a Potawatomi woman, a botanist, and teaches us all about how to be thoughtful in our acknowledgement of our environment and to really create a culture of gratitude. I am listening to the audiobook right now, and its slow, soothing pace is full of spirit, warmth, and tenderness. Now onto memoirs. I really love Therese Marie Myatt's Heartberries. Myatt comes from the Seabird Island Reservation in the Pacific Northwest and writes about her experiences with mental illness. There are some quotations in here that completely and utterly blow my mind. I quote them all the time because I find her work so compelling. In white culture, forgiveness is synonymous with letting go. In my culture, I believe we carry pain until we reconcile it through ceremony. Pain is not framed like a problem to be solved. I don't even know that white people can see transcendence the way that we do. I'm not sure that dichotomies apply to me. I think self-worth is a white invention. It asks people to further separate one person from another. It asks people to assess their values and imply that people have worth. It seems like identity capitalism. The phrase identity capitalism always makes me like pause and inhale in ways that few other things do. What I love about Myatt's work is she consciously asks us to reframe what being well or unwell is, and how being mentally ill isn't some slight of character or an individual problem. In her case, it is exacerbated by minority stress, intergenerational trauma, because she is a First Nations woman living in a colonial state, trying to heal in a profoundly white, westernized system. It's short, it's powerful, unrelenting in both its intensity and compassion. It is a testament to what people are able to create during some really serious and traumatic times in their lives. I genuinely believe it is one of the best books I've ever read. When I think about it, I want to buy multiple copies so that I can lend one out to people while also keeping one for myself. Another memoir I'm looking forward to reading is More Than Enough by Elaine Welteroth. Welteroth was the former editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue, was one of 2 African-American people to do so, one of the youngest, and is known for her shift in format for the magazine. During the 2016 presidential election, the magazine highlighted civic engagement, social justice, cultural appropriation, and celebration of diversity. Her book is all about speaking up for yourself, how to advocate for yourself when you might be the only racialized or minority in the room, and how your contributions that you make are more than enough. And even if people are telling you they're not, they're more than enough. The reviews for this book are really, really high from what I've seen so far, and I can't wait to read it. Lastly, a little bit of fiction for you. Home Remedies by Juliana Wang is a collection of short stories all about Chinese millennials trying to make their way in the world, with stories that focus on themes like sexuality, immigration, success, and self-discovery. Wang's short story collection is poetic, powerful, and brings to light unheard voices from an unheard generation. That's it. Those are all the books and my tips for how to enjoy reading and how to recover from burnout. As you can tell, the majority of the books in this video are written by cisgender women, black women, indigenous people, people of color, queer people, and disabled folks. Their labor and the fact that it falls to marginalized communities to heal ourselves didn't go unnoticed while I was writing the script for this video. What are your favorite burnout books? I'd love to know. Let's talk in the comments below. Remember, seek help and be gentle with yourself. You must have bread, but you must have roses too. Bye everyone.